The sound of the Hellespont was not the crash of waves. It was the rhythmic, agonizing creak of leather straps against salt-cored wood. It was the sound of 180 triremes, the wooden walls of Athens groaning under the stress of their own inertia. Theron, a Thrainite top-tier rower on the flagship Perilous, sat on his sheepskin cushion, his hands blistered and wrapped in linen strips that had turned gray with sweat. It was September, 405 BC. The narrow strait between Europe and Asia smelled of rotting seaweed, unwashed bodies, and the terrifying, metallic scent of an empire running on fumes. Theron's normal was a state of muscular purgatory. For 4 days, the routine had been identical, a theater of war performed for an audience of seagulls. Every morning at dawn, the Athenian fleet would launch from the sandy beach of Aigospotami. They would row across the strait to the harbor of Lampsakis, where the Spartan fleet under Lysander was anchored. They would shout insults. They would bang their spears against their shields. They would dare the Spartans to come out and fight. And for 4 days, Lysander had done nothing. The Spartan ships remained proud to the harbor mouth, motionless, silent, disciplined. A wall of bronze beaks that refused to bite. Theron wiped the sweat from his eyes. The heat was oppressive, trapping the humidity of the strait against the water. His reality was defined by the back of the man in front of him, a medic named Ion, whose spine was twisted like a knotted rope. The machinery of survival here was the oar. It was the synchronized pull of 170 men per ship. A human engine that required 8,000 calories a day, but was running on half rations of barley and sour wine. Easy all. The Calouste boatswain shouted, hammering his baton against the sounding board. Backwater. We returned to the beach. Theron felt the collective sigh of the crew ripple through the hull. It was 14 o'clock hours. The daily pageant was over. The Spartans wouldn't fight. The Athenians, bored and hungry, would now row back to their indefensible beach at Aigospotami to forage for food. He mocks us, Ion whispered, spitting over the side. Lysander sits in the shade and watches us burn our strength in the sun. He is afraid, Theron lied, though the knot in his stomach said otherwise. He knows we are the masters of the sea. He waits for us to leave so he can sneak away. Or he waits for us to starve, Ion grunted. They beached the Perilous on the sand and shingle of the European shore. The normal chaos ensued. There was no market at Aigospotami. It was just a stretch of desolate beach. To eat, the thousands of sailors had to disperse, walking miles inland to Sestos or scattering into the countryside to scavenge. It was a logistical nightmare that the generals, Titius and Menander, seemed to view as a minor inconvenience. Theron climbed out of the hole, his legs shaking. He was hungry. A gnawing, hollow sensation that made his vision swim. He looked up the ridge. The generals were gathered by the command tent, drinking wine, laughing. They looked like gods on Olympus, indifferent to the ants below. Then came the disturbance. It wasn't a trumpet. It wasn't a scream. It was a visitor. A rider on a Thracian horse came down from the hills. He didn't look like a soldier. He looked like a king in exile. It was Alcibiades, the disgraced genius, the traitor, the savior, the man who lived in his own private fortress nearby. He rode straight to the generals. Theron was close enough to hear the exchange, hidden behind a stack of drying sails. "You are exposed," Alcibiades said, his voice carrying over the wind. "You are anchored on a beach with no harbor, no city, no food. You scatter your men every afternoon like sheep without a shepherd. Lysander is not a fool. He watches you. We are the generals of Athens," Titius sneered, waving a cup. "We do not need advice from an exile." "Go back to your castle, Alcibiades. Move the fleet to Sestos," Alcibiades warned, pointing south. "Fight under the protection of a harbor. If you stay here, you die here." "Go," Menander shouted. "We command here." Alcibiades shook his head, looking at the beached ships with a profound sadness. He turned his horse and rode away. But the real disturbance wasn't the rejection. It was what happened immediately after. A scout ship that Delos arrived from the daily patrol. It beached hurriedly. The captain, a man Theron knew to be steady and unimaginative, ran to the generals. He wasn't carrying a report of enemy movement. He was carrying a broken amphora. "Generals," the captain gasped. "The supply convoy from the Pontus. The grain ships we were expecting from the Black Sea. We found wreckage drift 10 miles north." "Wreckage?" Titius stood up. "Storm damage?" "Oh, sir," the captain said, holding up a shard of pottery. It was scorched black, fire, and ram marks. They didn't hit rocks. They were intercepted. Intercepted? By whom? Lysander is in Lampsacus. "All of him," the captain whispered. "We saw ... shadows, fast triremes painted black. They hit the grain convoy at dawn and vanished. The food isn't coming, sir. The fleet is starving. The convoy that never arrives was the factual disturbance that shattered the fragile morale. The Athenians were already hungry. Now they were cut off. The grain from the Black Sea, the very reason they were fighting to control the Hellespont, was gone. The order to consolidate was never given. Instead, the generals, panicked by the lack of supplies but refusing to show weakness, issued a new order. Disperse further. Forage wider. We need food by nightfall. It was an order rooted in denial. The machinery of survival dictated that. A starving army must scatter to eat. But a scattered army is not an army. It is a crowd. Theron watched his crewmates wandering off into the hills, leaving the ships unmanned. The beach looked like a shipwreck survivors camp, not a military base. He stayed by the Perilous, trying to boil some salt water and herbs in a pot. He felt a deep primal unease. Why had Lysander intercepted the grain but not engaged the fleet? Why starve them if he could fight them, lest he wanted them on the beach? It was 16 o'clock. The sun was dipping low, casting long shadows across the strait. Theron looked out across the water toward Lampsacus. The Spartan fleet was invisible, hidden inside the harbor. But there was a single dot on the water. A Spartan scout ship. It floated in the middle of the strait, motionless. It had been there every day, watching the Athenians disperse. Then Theron saw it, a flash. A bright, brilliant glint of sunlight reflecting off polished bronze. Someone on the Spartan scout ship had raised a shield, not defensively. They were angling it, catching the sun, signaling it was a coded message that shouldn't exist, at least one that Theron shouldn't have been able to see. A single flash, then another. Theron stood up, kicking the pot over, the shield. He yelled, "Look at the scout ship." No one listened. The camp was asleep or empty. Theron ran to the water's edge. He watched the scout ship turn and row frantically back toward Lampsacus, and then the silence of the strait broke. It wasn't a roar. It was a rhythmic, rising, thrumming sound. Hum dash hum dash hum. From the harbor mouth of Lampsacus, they emerged. Not one ship, not 10, the entire Spartan fleet. 180 ships. They weren't rowing at a cruising pace. They were rowing at ramming speed. They were fully manned, fully armed, and moving in a perfect line abreast. Theron froze. The horror was absolute. The Athenians were scattered over 3 miles of countryside. The ships on the beach were empty. To the ships. Theron screamed, his voice tearing his throat. To the ships. They are coming. Conon, one of the few competent commanders, saw it too. He hoisted the blood-red signal flag on his ship. Launch, launch immediately. But you cannot launch a trireme with 10 men. You need 170. Theron scrambled aboard the Perilous. Pull, push. "Get her in the water." A handful of men grabbed the ropes. They strained against the heavy hull. It moved an inch. It was too late. The Spartan fleet crossed the strait in less than 20 minutes. It was a massacre in slow motion. Lysander didn't have to fight a naval battle. He fought a landing operation against unarmed men. The Spartan ships beached alongside the Athenian ones. Heavily armed Spartan Marines' hoplites in full bronze leaped. Onto the sand, there was no phalanx to meet them. There were just half-naked rowers holding cooking pots and sticks. Theron drew his knife. He saw a Spartan hoplite charging him, a faceless machine of bronze and horsehair. Theron ducked under the spear thrust and stabbed at the man's greaves. But he was knocked backward by a shield bash. He scrambled into the surf. The water was churning with blood. He looked down the beach. It was an apocalypse. The Athenian fleet, the pride of the democracy, the ruler of the waves, was being burned where it sat. Ships were blazing. Men were being cut down as they ran from the hills, tired, hungry, and confused. Conon managed to launch 9 ships, 9 out of 180. They fled toward Cyprus. The rest were trapped. Theron floated in the water, hiding under the hull of a burning trireme. The heat was intense. The smoke choked him. He watched the Spartans moving methodically down the beach, executing the prisoners. They weren't taking slaves. Lysander had given the order. Death to the Athenians. Theron looked west. He watched the horizon burning red and thought. It was dawn till he realized the sun was still hours away. The red wasn't the sun. It was the bonfire of the Athenian Empire. The ships were burning. The sails were burning. The hopes of the city were burning. The factual disturbance, the interception of the grain convoy, had forced them to scatter. The signal shield had triggered. The trap? The complacency of the generals had.